Happy Sunday, everyone. Mike from Hound Dog Media here, and it's time for another episode of Con to Couch. With so many conventions delayed or canceled this year, we're bringing the best guests and coolest hangouts of that experience right to you in the comfort of your own home. Today, we're bringing you the third installment of Flint Dille's limited series celebrating the upcoming release of his new book, The Gamesmaster, Almost Famous in the Geek 80s. It's available for pre-order on Amazon and other major booksellers, or you can go to Rarebird Publishing in the show links and pre-order your autographed copy today. Today, we've got Marv Wolfman, Jim Ward, and special guest co-host Doug Booth. And without further ado, here's Flint Dille.
Thanks a lot. Sorry, I didn't know whether I was supposed to start talking or not early. Sorry for jumping that. That's great. He's got really like the great voice for doing that stuff. Anyway, so yeah, and then hiding in the corner here's Luke Gygax, who will reappear. He showed up and wearing his fatigues. He's now Lieutenant Colonel Luke Gygax. And okay, so we have moved our way up to, we are in like 1985 right now. So we're sort of we're slowly crawling through the mid 80s. And the people you have here, you have two Doug, who was on last week, who is my kind of evil twin, and no, he was a good twin. It's Sunbow. And then you have, I'm sure most of you guys know who these other guys, but you have Marv Wolfman, who, Marv will introduce himself because it's just so complicated who he is, and we have an interesting way of doing that. And then you have Jim Ward, who's sort of a parallel guy to him in gaming world. If Marv was sort of the descendant of Stan Lee, Jim was the descendant of Gary Gygax, except for Luke, who's genetically a descendant from Gary Gygax.
Yeah, really.
but Jim was I called him one of the apostles of Dungeons and Dragons, because he was actually there, whereas as Luke was probably about two at that when Dungeons and Dragons, the Dungeons and Dragons and Luke were conceived about the same time.
Yeah,
all right,
really.
Enough on that. Okay, so we'll start out with Marv. And first off, to explain who Marv is, all we need to do is look at the office behind you. You mind just taking through a tour? Marv created half the characters, pretty much any Marvel DC character not created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. This is not true. This is a lie, but nevertheless, take a look at what Marv's done.
Okay, first, what you're seeing are statues of various characters that are created. Deathstroke, very weird one, because he's fighting some sort of a monster, which is not what Deathstroke does, but it looks really cool. Cyborg from the Teen Titans, and on TV, the Doom Patrol.
Well, he's symbolic for the fact you created all the modern Teen Titans except Robin, right?
In the first episode of the TV show Arrow, it opened on the mask of Deathstroke with an arrow going through the eye, and somebody had that made for me, which is perfect. Let me see if I can show anything else. I don't know. Over here are this is all Teen Titans characters, various versions of Teen Titans characters. These are some of the Marvel ones that I created. Bullseye, Blade, Black Cat, Nova, Terrax. Down there, some more of the characters. On this side, there's more. There's a whole bunch.
A whole bunch.
Anyway, so there is your Zoom tour of Marv Wolfman's office here. Okay, so what you might have gathered from that is Marv has done quite a bit in the comic business. And I think people are also aware of the fact you came rolling over to the animation business at exactly, in the mid '80s, in exactly this period. I don't know whether to start with, hit a rewind and have you talk about, how you got into the comics business, or start with getting to LA. Either one of them is a great story.
Well, in comics, I was a fan. I was a huge fan of the stuff. And I published fanzines. And after a while of annoying all the editors there, one of them found a script in his desk. He had just taken over the job, and he sat down. He found, for the first day, he sat down, found an envelope in his desk. It was from me, and it was a script that the previous editor, I had sent to the previous editor, who never opened it, but he didn't throw it out either. And the editor who sat there now asked if I wanted him to read it, and he did. I did, and he did. And the cool thing was he bought it. So that was my first sale in December of 1967.
Wow.
Whoa.
You were 9 years old or something, right? Because you were like a senior editor at 12 or what?
I wrote it in utero.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I figured. Yeah. Fortunately, you had one of the early model Wi-Fi printers. But I mean, Marv was one of, okay, now we'll jump to the mid 80s. You were one of the people who rolled out, and there were a lot. I mean, Roger Slifer eventually came out. Len, of course, came out about the time you did. Who else came out? I mean, you're kind of, I mean, my association with it was that Marv was kind of a friend of Steve Gerber's. And Steve, went to his buddies and said, "Hey, I'll give you a 3-script deal, and that will pay for your move to Los Angeles." I mean, is that accurate, or am I making that up?
He didn't say that would pay my thing. What happened was I wrote the G.I. Joe that he asked me to do. They liked it and asked me, and the Sunbow liked it and wanted me to be a producer out of New York.
Oh.
But I was moving. They didn't know this. I was about to move to California. And so they offered me the Transformers as a story editor, rather than the producer job. And I took that, and that's what brought me out here.
Yeah,
Nice.
well, because you basically replaced me if I was still story editor at that point, but it was at the end of season 3.
Yeah, well,
and I was doing Visionaries and Inhumanoids, and everybody was sick of me on Transformers anyway.
it was pretty amazing. But is my visual up there, or is it moving?
Look in the little
Yeah.
top corner, like a.
No,
Yeah,
you're fine.
you're coming in
You
great.
look fine. You sound fine.
Yeah.
Yep,
Okay,
looking good.
Computer, it's not moving at all. It's a frozen image, but that's okay. I know what I look like.
Yes.
So anyway, where was I?
Your move out to LA.
Out and the day after I moved out, there's a big meeting at Sunbow at a restaurant, and I had never met any of the guys before. So I showed up. I was sitting next to Doug. I remember that. And Flint was on the other side of the desk, and this is the first time I'm meeting anybody there. And Flint is doing his Flint, where he speaks in words that I have no idea what they mean. And
No one else does either.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, no, nobody does. The meeting was at Lost Toilet, which of course wasn't the real name of the restaurant. Because Lost Toilet was the hiring and firing restaurant, I suspect. It's like, whenever they come out, and say, it says somebody was taking the lunch at Lost Toilet, they were either hired or fired.
it was really cool because Sunbow was so cool at the time.
Yeah, Sunbow was incredibly cool.
Sunbow.
I mean, you don't get better guys, and I tried to get Tom and Jay to come on, but they said they'd watch, but they don't want to do it. But what great people! And Joe, of course.
It felt to me like Marvel did when in New York. Very open, very free. People just were enjoying themselves in the office, and that's pretty much the way it was there too.
Yeah. No, there was like no adult supervision. I mean, Carol Weitzman, was hardly an authoritarian figure, and Hildy wasn't really, adult. I never considered Joe and Tom or Jay particularly adult supervision. I mean, that's why we were able to do so much in so little time. I mean, think about it, like 130 episodes of just a Joe and Transformers came out in a year, and that's not to mention robotics and Inhumanoids and muscle machines and all the shows I didn't work on, like Gem and My Little Pony. And somehow very small staff stayed on top of all that stuff.
Well, the T-shirts we had really did truthfully say it all. We work while others sleep. Now, I don't know if anybody sleeps, but we didn't.
No, there was no sleeping. But what's really funny is there was never any boredom. And I don't remember feeling ever particularly overworked because the days were so great. I mean, Doug, talk about what you were going to talk about that. Just the whole cycle we go through, storyboard, what a day looked like. This kind of Marv's life too.
Well, what I thought was the neatest part about the whole Sunbow experience was they put writers in charge of production. Which, I mean, who would have thought of that back in those days?
That's really irresponsible. And we were really technically ad executives.
Yeah, which never occurred to me. I mean, yes, maybe we were doing 30-minute commercials for toys, but boy, were they great commercials.
Yeah, really.
I was like, I don't know, they had Jay Ward doing Chevy commercials or something. But the thing that was so neat for me was Jay really introduced me into how to do notes on storyboards. And I mean, someone like Marv, who maybe is much more in tune with the writing, the story, and the visual. But I grew up in Hanna-Barbera, where it was factory line. We would do a script, pass it off, never see or hear it again. Maybe we would wander into a recording session and say, whoa, those guys can do amazing voices. But never saw storyboards, never talked to artists. We were kept apart from them. Here, basically, when I would get a G.I. Joe storyboard, I would go over it very carefully with the script side by side, you know, one of Marty Pasco's 55-page scripts. And what I would do was the script helped me understand the storyboard, because just reading a storyboard, I would just say, whoa, that looks great. Yeah, it's cool. Reading it with the script, I would know what the story was. I would know who the characters were. I would know what we needed to accomplish in the story. And I would be able to very carefully check and see if the storyboard fulfilled the promise of the script. And if it didn't, then I got to make all kinds of notes and spend maybe 3 or 4 hours on the phone with the producer. Good Lord. But telling the producer what notes needed to be done to make the script, to make the storyboard, which is the blueprint for the entire show, work. And to me, that was the key to making sure that G.I. Joe fulfilled the promise of the really wonderful scripts and brilliant storyboard artists, but making sure that they were telling the same story. So to me, that was like the heart of the experience of why Sunbow was so good.
Well, not to mention the fact you got to go to the voice recording sessions, and you know.
Well, duh. Yeah, of course. That was just popcorn. That was wonderful. But to me, that was the heart of what I had to do. It might have been different for everybody else, but that was, for me, that was like the key to it.
Well, I mean, I think you were a lot. I mean, yeah, we did all this stuff that I like half paid attention to in film school. I just walked into that job and everybody assumed I knew how to do it. But then, you know, I mean, they probably secretly knew I didn't, but you know, you just figured it out pretty quickly. You know, we're going to sweetening sessions, you know, and like, okay, we're doing sweetening today. But that was what was so cool about the job, is you always had something different to do. And somehow, you know, some combo played if Hillary and Linda Giella, you know, kept their schedule straight. You know, because you know, it's like I've never been able to keep a calendar. You know, no, that was really incredible. And but it was probably pretty much the same by the time you got there, Marv, except for the place was halfway in a body bag. But you were there early enough. I remember Hildy put Mauve, M-O-V, because you still had a much deeper New York accent at the time, on your inbox, Mauve.
Now, I got there, I can tell you exactly, because it was March 4th, 1986.
Okay.
And, that's the day I moved out to California, and that evening was the dinner. So that's when I first met everybody. Now, I had no background in this at all. I had never written a animation script or any type of script in my entire life. Living in New York, as I was at the time, that wasn't available. This is before you had FedEx, so you could do things back and forth or anything. So for me, all of this was absolutely brand new. I didn't know most of the stuff. The silliest thing was that I was given a couple of scripts to look at, just because I asked when I was going to write. They asked me to write one. I said, "Can I have a couple of others just to see how they're handling some of the things?" I didn't say that I had no idea what was happening. I figured that would not be a smart move. So they give me a couple of scripts, and I'm reading them, and I have no idea what a script should be, because every so often there would be something like G.I. Joe headquarters exterior, or EXT. I'm sorry,
right,
or in INT, and I'm going, what is EXT and INT? I've never heard that.
Ooh.
And in comics we don't do that. So I'm like trying to figure it out, and I finally go, I'm just going to put it down there. I have no idea.
You just randomly put Indian accent.
If the INT was an interior or EXT, I hope it was. Nobody said anything, and they did offer me the job, so they must have thought that I did it right, or by right. But it was pretty phenomenal because you were saying that I think Doug said something about you were doing toy commercials. I never felt that because they didn't tell me I had to.
No, it never felt
Mm-mm.
like that. Intellectually, we
Mm-mm.
knew it. They never treated it like product.
Yeah,
Neither did Hasbro, interestingly enough.
Mm-mm.
yeah. It always felt like I was just writing my comics or something like that. Where yes, it was somebody else's property. When I write Superman.
Marv froze a little bit there.
Well, he was talking about Superman, and he just went into a time shift.
Yeah, that's right. He's back.
There we go. Yeah.
With somebody else.
It was a
We'll be back.
DC
Oh
product.
yeah, you're
so-
back now.
He's
You're
back.
for a
He
second
just
there.
circumnavigated the globe. Now he's back.
We
Are you
just
back?
we just filled in for you what you were really doing when your screen. Yeah, screen froze again. What do we want to do? Should we go in and come out, or are we good? We'll just wait for it to catch up.
Hey,
Oh,
I
just talk
did
about something.
I did a G.I. Joe script myself, Operation Weapons Disaster, and I did the very same thing Marv did. I asked you to give me a couple scripts, and you did, because this writer bombed out and didn't turn over the
Yes.
script he was supposed to. So you gave me like 2 weeks to write the script, and I
Yep.
was able to get it done. I put every single female in the G.I. Joe universe in the cartoon.
Good work.
Yes, exactly, and it showed, and I thought it was really good, and I was able to get a GI Joe Pick-a-Path book out of that script work, so that turned out
Oh,
good
that's
for me
great.
too.
I didn't know you did a GI Joe Pick-a-Path book.
Yeah, I did it based on that cartoon, Operation Weapons
nice.
Disaster.
Nice.
Yeah,
Oh
so
wow.
worked out really good.
Yeah, that's something we'll talk about later on because I am going through and re-editing the Sagard books at this exact
Oh,
moment.
really? Sure.
I'm sitting here, right on my desk right here, just so you know I'm not lying. I have a four-sided die. Look at that, a four-sided
Oh, there
die.
we go.
that,
Yeah.
I'm rolling, and I finally figured out why I thought a four-sided die was such a great idea, because it's a pyramid, right?
Yeah.
I just thought it was cool because it looked like a pyramid. But the other thing is they don't roll anywhere. In other words, you roll them and they just stop.
That's
Oh.
true.
You know, they don't roll around. And I remembered that finally when I was doing it. That's why I picked four-sided, because it always seemed like such a weird decision,
Yeah.
at the time.
So
Anyway, enough of that.
are you combining all the Sigurd books?
I'm just taking the first one and figuring out how you put it on a pad format, so you can just hit go to. We're not doing anything elaborate. You can either do the fights, keep track of them by pencil, or you can print out a PDF of just the fight scenes and nothing but them, so you can cross off your damage.
Oh, fun.
But I figure people like to, the tactile thing of rolling dice. Okay, Marv is back. We will talk about this. We'll talk about this after the 5 o'clock. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, sorry, Marv. You froze for a minute, so we, of course, being the linear people that we are, drifted off into Jim's G.I. Joe script.
Yeah.
But it really was in every sense. I mean, what everybody's story is, that was a place who was willing. It wasn't saying, "Oh, we want to know that you have 10 years experience doing all these things." You just got thrown in the pool and figured it out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I can't. What was your first script, Marv, that you wrote?
What was that?
For your first G.I. Joe that you wrote, or was it Transformers?
It was a G.I. Joe. It was called, I think, Lasers in the Night.
I think I edited that script. Because usually Steve would give me scripts that were from friends of his, like I edited Roger's script and stuff like that, because he did.
Yeah,
that's kind of interesting. I remember that one.
Yeah, I did that one. Then I did another one that I don't remember, and then a couple of more. The Transformers ones, because they had killed Optimus Prime, and suddenly they got all this hate mail or whatever. So they came to me to write instantly a 2-parter featuring, no joke, every single Transformer who existed. They gave me the book with like 500 Transformers.
Oh yeah, sure.
And
yep.
I had to fit them all in and revive Optimus Prime. It's 2 scripts. Every character had to be listed, and it was due in like a week and a half.
Oh,
wow! Wow!
So
well done.
I did not sleep. No.
Yeah, I bet.
No.
Yeah, no, that was well, everybody had stories about that where you didn't sleep. I mean, I wrote in Humanoids. We'll talk about that next week. But I wrote that while I was quitting smoking, and it reads like it. I mean, it's kind of funny. Okay, so you also wrote, Marv. You also wrote Gem, didn't you? I mean, you wrote pretty much every show we had. I think.
Yeah, I wrote My Little Pony, Jam.
You wrote a My Little Pony?
I wrote a couple of them, yeah. And a bunch of other stuff. It's hard to remember some of them now, but yeah, I seem to got into various ones, and I was still never sure why, because again, my background wasn't there. I was just thrilled to be able to do one because I wanted to do an animation script. I didn't realize there'd be more involved, and they gave us the freedom, as I say, that I always felt that I had, like at Marvel or early DC stuff too, where we could just concentrate on good characters and tell a fun story. And when you have that, I mean, because I did G.I. Joe for another a studio as well, and it wasn't quite like that. So I got to go from both sides.
Well, what's funny about the kind of common theme of all three of you guys is you're all kind of polymaths in the sense that you pretty effortlessly went from medium to medium. Jim, you did wildly different, everything from role-playing modules to, beer and pretzels games. Yeah, Doug's, I mean, all you guys, went from project to project and medium to medium, and you really didn't blink, other than wondering what it next meant.
I always
I mean, and that's all, that is exactly the kind of writer that this era breeds for. I mean, that's what's kind of interesting about it.
Well, I never saw myself as anything but a writer. I didn't think of myself as a comic book writer or a TV writer or a movie writer, or whatever. I was just a writer, and I would write for whatever medium. It wasn't like I decided that I was just going to be this.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true, and it's a really fascinating thing. Also, too, before the moment passes, I talk about it a lot. I tell a little story about it in the book. But what was really cool, a moment that kind of sums up that era, a central moment in Geek 80s, was Marv had a party right after he moved out. Okay, Marv was living in this house. Were you there, Doug? Did you go to that thing? Marv had this party in it.
Like the 60s. I can manufacture memories of it, but I'm not sure if they're real or not.
There we go.
I am quite sure you and Yolanda were there. But what was interesting about it was, Marv rented this house that I think was previously a set for Boogie Nights. I mean, because it seemed like that kind of house, and it was, just exactly in the right place in the valley. And like everybody was there, but it was the first moment when the entire comic book world of that era. I mean, Frank and Lynn were there. It was the first time I ever met Howard Chaykin. It was, all sorts of comic book people were there. Roger was there and Len was there, and all that. And all the animation people were there. And it was one of those times when, like, I realized this was just becoming one big world.
Yeah.
Right.
Does that make any sense?
Oh yeah.
And I remember it was just, but the other really interesting quality to that night is realizing that all you guys had a life before you came to LA, like Gerber played volleyball. I mean, and Frank, I mean, can you imagine Frank and Gerber playing volleyball? And I heard Frank actually is much more athletic than you would expect him to be, but, they're having volleyball games. They're living in these lofts. I think who else was in that loft with Frank and Howard Chaykin and Lynn and Walt Simonson was there and somebody else was there.
Well, Louise, Wheezy, Walt
Yeah, Wheezy, yeah.
There, Bernie Wrightson, Mike Kaluta, whole bunches of people, because everyone knew each other. We all had to live in New York. Because that's the way the publishers insisted. They wanted us there so we could come in for meetings. And so everybody lived within a few blocks of each other. And we get to reasons. So when I came out here, I didn't know anybody in California at the time. So the couple of people I did know, I said, please invite others. Just tell them to come.
Right.
That way, at least I get a chance to meet people. And it worked.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was the funny thing, but that was the moment when this all just became one massive shared world. It was like the Justice League and the Justice Society all showed up in the same place. And I realized that there were these two alternate worlds, because we were talking about in a previous show where, wait, Doug, did you write to Dungeons and Dragons, or was it Buzz? Somebody had written the Dungeons and Dragons.
No, I worked on a Filmation knockoff development, which was really good, but it wasn't Dungeons and Dragons, so it didn't go.
Right. Yeah. Then it must have been Buzz, but he wrote a D&D script. I, of course, was working on Ruby Spears, but Gary and I used to read through the scripts. But I mean, it was just, you were beginning to see, because that's when Game World stepped into all this stuff,
right?
And the ridiculous TSR mansion, but which we will get to in 5 minutes. So we'll talk about that with Jim. But yeah, I'm trying to think of who else was there, but that was just the sense that we had this huge community, and and then when Sunbow would have parties, and all of a sudden all the voice actors would show up, it was like, wow. I mean, there really is this whole kind of art community, and everybody was learning from everybody else. Because I think what comic book guys brought to animation that wasn't there before was a sense of continuity, a sense of backstory, a sense of world. Does that make sense, Marv?
Oh yeah, that's because comics are just run differently, and animation was all individual episodes, and they weren't connected to a greater whole. And comics are all about the greater whole. It's all a massive universe, and secondarily about the individual issue.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and what's really fun is the guy who caught that very quickly was Buzz, because Luke showed up just in time. We're going to go to Jim in a second here. It was Buzz, started taking Hector Ramirez and treating it like it was shared world. And all of a sudden you have the same reporter, which was really Geraldo Rivera. It's the same reporter showing up in every Sunbow show, and it's kind of amusing stuff. But okay, so what we'll do now is we'll shift over to since Luke. When Luke showed up in the pre-check, he was Lieutenant Colonel Luke Gygax, and where he was wearing military garb. Now he's got his Iron Maiden shirt, which is actually not a bad place to start talking about, because the first Gygaxes I met came out, other than Gary, was Ernie would come out and he'd immediately hit the Sunset Strip, which I always thought was kind of menacing. I was afraid to go there. And he'd be seeing bands like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and everything else there. Yeah, but you were 13, so you were not going there. You and I were sitting back at the mansion playing bogus league football.
Playing bogus league football, which was great fun.
Yeah, exactly. Well, all right. The reason Luke thinks bogus league football is fun is Luke figured out a pass play. Okay, he had like the Tom Brady of Mattel and television football, quarterbacks, and I could never stop it, no matter what. So he could get a touchdown anytime he wanted. So he'd mess with me for the first 3 downs, and I could never stop for Luke. Nor could I emulate it. I didn't have my bogus league long bomb. But okay, so the first game designer I meet that comes out there is Jim Ward, and I'm not sure whether Luke should introduce Jim Ward or whether Jim should introduce Jim Ward, but I've never heard the Jim Ward origin story. Well, you were 2 at the time, Luke, so the Jim Ward first meeting Gary and getting involved in D&D origin story. So let's, for the first time, hear that, because I don't even know that story.
It's my favorite story to tell, okay? So I just graduated from college in 1973, and every Tuesday I would go to the Lake Geneva bookstore and buy fantasy and science fiction novels. That's when they got them in. So one Tuesday in the summer, I'm in there buying novels, and I have 7 of them in my hand. And they're like Elsbreg de Camp's Conan book, and Andrea Norton, and Arthur C. Clarke, those kind of guys. And
Jack
so I've got
Van.
7. Yeah, exactly. So I'm coming to the end of the book aisle. I've got 7 in my hands, and I look off to my right, and there's this biker dude. And he's got a blue jean jacket, and he's got ripped jeans, and he has one of these wallets with one of those great big long chains, and he's really kind of scruffy. He's got a scruffy goatee, and he's got a scruffy head of hair, and he has the exact 7 books in his hand. So we looked at each other and we looked at our books and we both laughed at it. We started talking about reading. And Gary Gygax said,
So the scruffy biker guy was Gary Gygax.
oh, it's Gary Gygax, yes. Gary said that he had a game that I could play Conan the Barbarian and fight Set. And I was hooked just like a fish. I went over to his house 2 weeks later, and we started playing, and I went there every week to play the game. And then later in that summer, I said to Gary, we absolutely have to do a science fiction version of this game. And he said, Jim, I don't have the time to do it. Do you think you could write it? And he didn't know if I could write. Nobody had ever written any role playing except for Gary. And so he let me write. Yeah, I know. He let me write Metamorphosis Alpha, the first science fiction game.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah. So that's my origin story with Gary.
Wow. And you're sitting there picking up the same books as he was picking up.
The exact
and I had
same
no idea who this biker dude was.
No.
Well, that's actually a funny little side trip to take in Gary's life. And that is, Gary used to go to this place in the day when I made it to Lake Geneva, which is like a decade later, called Jane's Bar.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And he had a fixation with guys like Skip Town. And who was that other guy? That wasn't really his name, but he was known as Skip Town.
Yeah,
it reminded me of Bob Seger.
Randy
What?
Mad Dog.
Yeah.
Randy Mad Dog and Skip Ashton with Skip Town. Yep.
Yeah. Gary had the secret biker identity that like nobody has ever talked about. But he did, and these guys showed up in Lake Geneva too. I mean, the parade of people that showed up at Lake Geneva was, in and of itself, an amazing collection of character. I just was, when I was proofing Sagard, I saw the Megiddo Warriors, and that was Mike Megiddo was crashed on the couch at that point. Remember him? So I just was naming characters after the people around us. There was Urgag the Wastrel, because Ernie had like stumbled in, late that morning, so he was Urgag the Wastrel, and all these characters started appearing in there. Okay, so you write Metamorphosis Alpha. Did TSR have an office at that point? Did you become an employee? What happened?
He was working out of his house, and we played in the basement and on the side porch. So they were just starting to buy the house that they had the office in for a couple years. They were just about to do that. They had made their first 1,000 brown box D&D sets that sold for $10 a piece and now sell for $22,000 a piece.
And you have several of them, so you've been selling.
Oh, I wish I did. No, I just have my one copy, and the only way that's going is from my cold, dead hands. So yeah, the game was just getting started. He didn't know he had a hit. He just thought he had a hobby game that he would really like doing. And he went to all the colleges and he started promoting it, and it became the big deal that it became.
Well, I mean, it's just something so funny about he's in biker mode saying, I got this game where you can play Conan,
Yes.
and you have no idea that's going to change your life.
I know.
You lived in Lake Geneva at that point?
8 miles away in Elkhorn. That's where I still live. I still live in Elkhorn, Wisconsin.
Wow. Because just for anybody that doesn't know it, Lake Geneva is a resort town. It's kind of where, like, even when I was a kid, because I grew up in a suburb of Chicago, you would go up to Lake Geneva in the summer if you knew somebody who had a motorboat and they'd take you water skiing, or you go to the Abbey, or we had our high school graduation was at the Playboy Club, which is the site of the current GaryCon. But at the time, it was the Playboy Club, and it was not a particularly risque place, but it was just cool that there was a Playboy Club. And that was the height of the Playboy empire. Okay, so now, how do you find out? Okay, I'm headed up to some mansion in Beverly Hills that TSR owns. All right, what's that meeting?
Well, that's and actually you're kind of responsible for that meeting. Gary knew I was looking for work, and so he said, "You know what? I think Flint can hook you up with his agent," and that's what you did. We called your agent and hooked up, and you you got me that GI Joe story,
Right.
and I sent a couple Transformer outlines in, and they used the ideas, but they never let me write the scripts.
Well, did they pay you for the ideas?
No, they didn't pay me a penny.
Oh
Those
man,
bad
that
guys.
is very
Oh.
un-Sunbow like, because they'd pay. I mean, usually a Sunbow when you would sell a premise, a check would be FedEx. They had FedEx in those days.
Sure.
A check would be FedEx to you the next
Yeah,
morning.
they were
That
a
was-
delight to work with. I mean, I loved writing the GI Joe script. That was just lots of fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Gary was going to get me some jobs, and so I came out there, and pretty much I discovered that you really had to live there to get a
Yep.
lot of work there. So
And
that
you were
was,
unwilling to leave Elkhorn.
Yeah,
But
that
you were
wasn't gonna
working at
happen.
TSR at that point.
was I working at no, I wasn't working at TSR. That was 1984, and I had been fired on April 4th of 1984.
You took me on the tour to where exactly your desk was when you were fired,
Yes.
and you still remember the date you were fired.
Oh,
and-
it scarred me. I have the scar right here. I can show you if you want. But yeah.
Yeah, well, you still remember the day and the location.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I remember the location. There's probably a plaque there, even though that's now
Probably, yes.
the
April-
Acme Ashtray Company or whatever is in that
April
building now.
4th, 1984 is when 55 people got axed that day.
Oh wow.
And they went from 386 people to 86 people after the
Wow.
fifth purge. It was
So
nasty. Every
was this
Friday.
after the Bloom purge? I mean, this was pre-Lorraine, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was pre-Lorraine for sure. Yeah, in
Yeah.
In '84. Yep. This was they were just the banks ordered them to get down there. Well, it was nepotism at its worst, actually.
Yeah, there were like 85 people named Bloom with. Yeah,
There
at the company.
was every Bloom cousin in the world worked for TSR, and Gary had his share too. But at least Gary's daughters were attractive, so it wasn't a bad deal.
Well, also too, Heidi is a very credible. I mean, I've never played with Cindy or Elise, so there's no slur on them. But if she's a very credible DM, I
Oh,
mean,
yeah,
she really
absolutely.
internalized this stuff. I mean, is
Yeah,
that
she
accurate,
did.
Luke? Yeah, so you guys have had that experience.
Yeah,
I mean, she
I-
actually could do that stuff.
Yeah, I played mostly with Heidi. However, I did run for Elisa and Cindy and Heidi both as a kid.
Yeah.
I was like 8 years old or something, and so there'd be a couple kobolds, and then I'd roll on the magic table to see what kind of cool stuff they got. So it was very Monty. It was very Monty.
There we go.
So that was your. I can only imagine growing up in the Gygax household at that point. But yeah, it was. He did. Gary had like inordinately attractive daughters. I hadn't thought about that before. Yeah, you're right.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Matter for
and
debate.
sons were losers. But what? Sorry, what?
Matter for, he said it was a matter for debate. He was being a typical brother.
Okay, so all right, so you show up there because you stayed for a long time at the mansion, as I recall. I mean, you were there for a while because I felt like I knew you by the time by the time you got done in LA. Is that right? Not Luke, Jim.
Oh, I stayed at the mansion for 3 weeks. Yeah, trying to get extra work, and you helped me out there, and I ran a bunch of Gamworld and MA games. for a
Remember
bunch of
that?
people. Yeah.
We're sitting around the table in this incredibly improbable collection of people. I mean, you have the Yukovich sisters would be there, and
And Luke
What's
was
her
there,
name?
of course.
Yes.
yeah, Luke was there. I mean, the usual crowd was there, but
Yeah.
there would always be Joey Thompson. I mean, because Joey more than anybody, when he'd play a character, when I remember back to it, I remember like some gestury looking elf that looked exactly like Joey Thompson, in a fantasy setting. Like I don't.
Yeah, really.
remember.
With sunglasses on.
Yeah, doing this stuff with this sweater.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Kind of fast talk.
So yeah, 3 weeks. I didn't get much more work out of that deal, but it was nice visiting Gary and meeting all the people and swimming in the heated swimming pool every morning.
Yeah,
Ooh, that
remember
was
that?
nice.
That was great.
Yeah, it
Yes,
was.
my lifestyle has definitely taken a turn for the worse since I left that beautiful
Oh,
mansion.
I understand that. Yeah, absolutely. I never did jacuzzi with the Yukovich sisters, though. I was kind of sad about that.
That didn't happen. or Leggy Peggy, yeah, that's what.
Yeah, really. They were just the Yukovich sisters were gorgeous women that were kind of helpers and secretaries for Gary and the group there.
Yeah, no, they were great. They were actually very smart and when put to it, very productive. But they didn't have a lot of stuff that they had to do. No, they were great. I mean, yeah, I mean, I remember that whole cast of characters very fondly. I mean, it was always fun and interesting there.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd show up and there was always something. I mean, somebody was always doing something, or there was some party for somebody, or some dignitary was coming into town, or some studio executive was coming over.
Flint, whose mansion was that originally? Was some famous actors.
It was a director. It was built by a guy named King Vidor.
Okay.
Who I'm working on a project that involves King Vidor at this moment. That's the irony of this whole thing. And he actually was investigating a murder of a guy, an unsolved murder from 1921, but that's a different thing. It was built by King Vidor. By the time we got there, he was long gone. I think he left in the late 40s. And it was owned, and you could never get a straight story as to whether it was owned by Barbara Streisand or Richard Harris. Or maybe
I heard Richard Harris. Yeah, I heard Richard Harris.
And yeah, I heard both stories, and I'll believe the Richard Harris story. But what was really funny is the stable, the creative office was their stable. That was the Vidor stable, because he built the house, because it wasn't like a normal mansion. It was like a German hunting lodge that happened to be a mansion.
Yep.
If designed by a James Bond set designer, it would kind of be the way I'd describe. Remember that sunken bar and all the stuff you only saw in What Sort of Man Reads Playboy columns, that had all that stuff. And the jacuzzi, but I think Gary put the jacuzzi in.
Oh, did he really?
I think so. Yeah, I don't remember. They had the cement pond was already there, but the jacuzzi, I think.
Olympic size pool, beautiful backyard, stands of bamboo. There's some really beautiful flowering trees that hummingbirds would come and every morning, and they'd be there kind of hovering. It's really beautiful. It was just an amazing setup. And then you're right, there was a sunken bar area with a pool table. So I got to shoot a lot of pool. So it was very nice.
And then there was the secret room behind the Bogus League football giant screen.
The secret room,
you remember the secret room? I think it was originally a screening room, because King Vidor was a director, and so that's where the camera was and all that, because there was a little hole in it. But it was the secret room with the secret panel that you had to open up to get in there. And I remember, I cannot tell you to this day what was actually in the secret room, but I remember the secret room existed. And then there was that whole long and winding segment. Anyway, all right. So Ernie, I'm calling you Ernie now. Jim, so what was your return to TSR after that was that April 2nd?
Yeah, okay, no, that's fair. So 16 months later, here what's happened. I was they fired me, and I started writing for the book department. I started writing pick-a-path books and novels and things for the book department. And 16 months later, an accountant realized that if they put me on salary, they'd pay me half of what they were paying me for writing books, as a freelancer.
So basically, your return to TSR was a thinly disguised pay cut.
Yes, exactly. They hired me back, but I was so relieved to get a regular weekly paycheck that I didn't mind at all. And then I worked there until I left in '97.
And that's like 15 years later. Because I mean, you were like by the time we were doing Dragon Strike, you were like a major executive there. I mean, you were doing the whole presentation for book fair, which was for sales and a toy fair and all the the toy pitches and all that stuff.
I was lucky in that I was a talkative game designer that kind of had an okay manner, so they could take me out and show me to people, but they didn't like showing the other designers and editors because
this
they were
one here dresses
rough.
Up good.
Yes, exactly.
You can clean him up and you put on a suit.
I had more than one tie in my closet, so I was okay.
Oh, it's really funny, because I mean, but a lot of the designers went on to do, Warren Spector ended up having a huge career, later on.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
And went on to do stuff, and a lot of them. I mean, you go to GaryCon, and they're all just still doing stuff now. I mean, and the artists too. Because
they all found good homes.
Yeah, I mean, after Frank Franzetta, those guys designed, basically, created what fantasy art looks like.
Sure, absolutely. And they're also talented too. They were all a cut above all the other people doing the same thing in the hobby industry. The
Oh yeah.
TSR's magazines, their look on their covers were state of the art in those days, and something everybody else tried to emulate. And that's because we had the best artists in the world, and we really had the best designers and editors too. So we
Did
were.
you ever
we were
write
doing
anything for
good.
Dragon?
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, I was a publisher for Dragon, and
I
I
didn't
think
know that.
I think I have about 110 Dragon magazine credits, article credits.
Wow. Well,
Gary
and
got
there's Dungeon Magazine too for a while, right?
Dungeon magazine that sold 50,000 units a month, and Dragon magazine sold 120,000 units a month.
Well, I remember TSR was the biggest imprint house in America at one point. I mean, they were their total book sales were like, those of like major publishers.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're part of Random House. It was Random House, right?
Yes, they were our distributor.
But I mean, that's what everybody forgets is there was a moment there. I mean, it went far beyond the cultural flash in the pan of D&D, and turned into just a major publishing concern in all sorts of different genres. And, I mean, probably if they hadn't had the banana peel of, after all the financial disaster and all that, it's just, I mean, the fact that it survived for more than a decade after that is itself notable.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I mean, but it was solely based on sales because there were just so many, there's all the like lawsuits from the early day stuff that I never really knew or understood. I mean, I never knew Arneson, or I met Arneson much later at the Air Force Academy. I mean, at the Air War College, much later in a totally different context, but I never met him in the day. So what else? So give us a couple more good stories. I hate to put you on the spot that way.
Oh, a couple more good stories.
But I know you will deliver.
Okay, so I really liked poor Gary. Gary had to referee all the time. He liked being a referee. He was the best referee I've ever heard in my 45 years of hearing referees, but he could never be a player. So he loved it when I would come over to on Christmas vacations, on summer vacations. I would come down and referee Metamorphosis Alpha for him. And I can remember one adventure that we were on, and he was having a real tough time. He was getting beat up. The players were getting beat up. I'm sure Luke and Ernie were in on those games too. But he found this old computer, and he found out how to get supplies from the ship's stores. And so he said to me, I really want to have some kind of drug that would boost my speed so I'd be quicker. And so I will never forget the look on his face when the computer says, "And how many metric tons would you like, sir?" and he got this big look on his face. I've never seen him so surprised ever in my life. And he said, "Metric tons?" It was like candy day at the store. He was very happy at that moment. In all the 40 years that I refereed him, I only killed him off once. And that was when...
Now, this is, by the way, this is very atypical. I think Luke will verify this. Nobody ever, under any circumstances, survives a Jim Ward game.
Okay, that's not quite true. That's not quite true.
I've survived once, maybe twice in Jim Ward games. That's about
There we
it.
go. See?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't mind dying because you always have nice presents for whoever. I have somewhere. I have my skull you gave me.
You still have your skull? Yeah. When
Oh,
people die...
I wouldn't get rid of the skull. I don't know where I put it, but it's in my office somewhere nearby.
When people die in my games, my tournament games, I hand them autographed plastic skulls with my name on them so they can remember that they had the fun of playing the game. But anyway, I only killed Gary once in all the times that I played with him, when he opened a door and 4 tons of brown fungi fell on him and killed his character.
And there was no saving throw.
Oh, no, there was no saving throw. No, he was gone.
Yeah. one of the stories that I remember, and I don't remember exactly how it came about. It might have been after talking to the robots who believed they were like Native Americans or some sort of like war tribe. And I think
the Arabian Nights robots that did tool wars up above their heads.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Those are the guys, and I think we managed to get some tactical nukes from them. And I might be.
Yes, you did.
Yes. Okay.
No, you did. You got them from them, yeah. And Gary with a tactical nuke is a very dangerous thing.
Because the Wolfoids had been attacking the Vigilists, which was the group that my father and some other folks had formed, and were resistant to their pure-strand humans, resisting all these, Wolfoids and androids and other sorts. So they talked to the Arabian Nights, and they I think they gave them a bunch of meat for some reason, and then we got some tactical nukes. And it was
in
great.
trade, yeah, trade for meat. That seemed like a fair deal, yeah. And then I have one city on the Starship Warden, and naturally Gary had to go just because it was filled with Wolfoids. He had to go and nuke it. So he nuked a whole city, and he wasn't sorry at all.
Yeah, that
Starship Warden made it into my Starship Troopers script too.
Oh, did it really?
Yeah. If you look at Starship Troopers Invasion, I'm friend John Warden, but I figured it was a double play on Warden, right?
Oh, okay, cool.
And,
it
makes it in there. Nobody noticed.
Wow.
Yeah. All right. What was the relationship, if any, between Metamorphosis Alpha, Gamma World, and Star Frontiers?
Okay, so first came Metamorphosis Alpha. It was a 32-page book. And we got literally TSR, when I say we, TSR got hundreds of letters of people wanting a planet version of Metamorphosis Alpha. So we said, fine, that's not a problem. So we wrote up Gamma World. That was the first apocalyptic role-playing game where we take the Earth 300 years in the future and we blow it up and we invade it with aliens and we toss down a couple diseases. And you play in what's left of the world. And so that was science fiction, and they were very happy to do it because the royalty I got for Gamma World was half as much as the royalty I got for Metamorphosis Alpha. So that really pleased Brian Bloom. He really liked that a lot.
I always love Jim's stories because it's kind of like listening to Buddy Holly talking about stuff, or Chuck Berry talking about stuff. It's like there's this moment where, the interviewer, I think it was Keith Richard, was saying, "Hey, how'd you get the idea for writing Maybelline?" And Chuck Berry's answer is, "Well, I found out that if you wrote the song, you got a bunch of money. So I wrote the song." No, but I mean, how'd you get the idea for the song? I said, "Well, I'm telling you, when I found out about the publishing rights and all that."
There we go.
Anyway,
there we go.
So Jim always, you're asking a creative person when it comes down to how much you got boofed on the deal.
Yeah, well, that's just life for us creatives, isn't it? So we did Gamma World. That was very popular, but they were still paying me a pretty stiff royalty, and so they said, "Hey, let's do a science fiction game where we don't have to pay Jim any royalty." And so Star Frontiers was designed by 8 different designers, and it kind of looks like an elephant designed by 10 people.
Right.
And they did products that way, but they didn't pay royalties to anybody. So the Blooms were
Star
ecstatic.
Frontiers a dog log? Because I don't think I ever played Star Frontiers.
Well, it was okay. I mean, they sold like 50,000 units of the first box, so that's good numbers. But
so he's talking about the money again. I was asking the creative. I was asking him if it's a dog log, but it's old.
That's what I live by. I live by the money made by these things. That's how I judge success. Okay, TSR was gigantically successful when we had big sales, and when sales tapered off, like in 1984, when they went right into the toilet, we weren't successful, and the money wasn't there.
Star Frontiers. Star Frontiers.
Sorry, Luke. Go on.
Star Frontiers was a lot of fun to playtest. So I playtested that with Zeb Cook, Mike Gray, and Jim Ward.
Yeah, but Gary ran it. I mean, Gary ran Star Frontiers like Gary ran his dungeons. I mean, he was such a creative storyteller that you could imagine yourself walking on the moon from Gary's description of the adventure. So it was a different deal playtesting Star Frontiers with Gary Gygax than it was
Correct.
with Zeb Cook
You
or
know, he
Alan
did
Hammock.
have that unique quality of you really felt like you were there.
Yes,
I mean, everyone would
absolutely.
say he'd do like subtle things. I remember I was playing some really, low end thief, and I never really thought about that. I never really looked at my stats and figured out, oh, I have to embody this character. And I remember I got a really good idea to try to do something. He said, "You're not smart enough to think of that." And that was one of those moments where I realized, oh, okay, I'm not playing as me. I got to be this dope that I'm
Yes.
playing. You know what I
Yes.
mean? And that kind of just changed my whole view of role playing. It was kind of interesting, because I
That's
never had somebody do that.
that's actually called metagaming. When
Yeah.
when your real life person interjects a concept that your character shouldn't know.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
it's
no,
gigantically frowned upon.
it was a fascinating moment. All right, so now we're heading into the third segment of the show. So we'll do the sharp transition here. Wait, no, I got one last piece of business with Marv. Okay, I got a couple questions that people on my Facebook page asked me. Then we'll go to the
Absolutely.
other one.
Okay.
And one of them is, okay, somebody posted on my page, Marv. I can't even parse the question. Oh, no, Marv froze again at the worst possible moment. Okay. No, he's back. Okay. And he said, loved your appearance in the last episode of Berlanti vs. Crisis in Infinite Earths crossover and asked Kara Denver's Supergirl and Barry Allen's Flash for autographs. Given those versions, the characters did not survive his version of the Crisis. That was a deeply rewarding moment for those who understood it. It might be from a hardcore fan. I have to parse that and figure it out, but I'm thinking possibly. All right, so what does that mean? Oh, Marv froze yet again. Marv, yeah. Now you're unfrozen now.
Okay, the original Crisis novel, I killed off both Supergirl and Flash, which was pretty big news back then. It was pretty big and amazing because nobody expected it. Also, we had killed Supergirl in issue 7, and nobody expected in issue 8 we'd kill another major character. So it got a lot of attention. And here I am meeting with Supergirl and Flash. I got to tell you, before the meeting, it was up in Vermont, up in Vancouver. And I was just waiting for my turn because the previous scene had them fighting some villainous. And I'm thinking I should introduce myself to them as the guy who killed them and apologize for killing them. And once the thing started, it was so business driven, I forgot to even say that. I just, did my role and that was it. I did my part, recited the dialogue, and never got a chance to apologize for killing them.
But this is the man who brought back Optimus Prime, so he has atoned for his freeform wanton murder of characters.
Yes, he has.
There's another question for this. For you, Marv. I'd like to ask Marv what he remembers about co-writing the band's breakup and what he thinks about how fans have perceived and received the episode over the years.
Okay, the band's breakup was an episode of Jim that I wrote, and must admit that 40 years later, I don't remember the story. It's been quite a long time. I don't think... I got more comments on it at conventions in the last couple of years than I ever did back in the 80s when it was written. It's like everybody's now coming out to be able to say, hey, really love that episode. And I keep going, thank you, thank you, thank you. And don't.
Oh, wow.
So,
All right. So, that's a good answer because you forget that. So there are whole episodes I forgot writing that I've actually credited on, and yet there are episodes I edited that I remember intimately. I mean, memory is a tricky animal. All right, but so here's the last thing I want to talk about at the end. Now, this is breaking our rule where usually the rule is you can't talk about anything that happened after 1987. But we'll break that rule because this is kind of a unique collection of people here, and this involves all of you. And that is all that stuff that was you guys were doing in 1985. I would argue, more or less created what is modern mass market and game culture. Okay, in other words, that exact synergy of these game guys running into these comic guys, running into these animation guys, because animation was the only, we didn't have CG back then. That was the only medium where you could do all these big stories, unless you had $1 trillion budget. But even, Star Wars was not, it would be, even with that technology, it would have been hard to do a real superhero movie, in 1984. Okay. At this exact moment, some of the biggest, movie, almost everything Marv ever touched is being turned into TV shows. Doug and I have, Transformers, and they're always making stuff out of the Hasbro stuff, and there's more of it in the Type pipeline. Dungeons and Dragons is hotter now than it ever was. So I hear from gamers with all these streaming game shows. So talk about what the seeds planted then and what's grown up now and why.
Well, in my case, having done Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was a concept that had never been done before, where we changed the entire DC universe, and comics had never gone into that territory. We never had a 12-issue maxi series before that killed off characters, that did introduce brand new ones. Nothing like this had ever been done before, and before we came out with it, the prediction was it wouldn't do well. Nobody was interested. And of course, I'm going, you're crazy. It's going to be big. It's going to be huge. As a fan, as somebody who grew up as a fan, I can go, every DC character is going to be in this. Yeah, it's going to be popular. Meanwhile, all the business people were going, nobody's going to care. Naturally, they were wrong.
Naturally.
Because it was the biggest sale DC had at the time. I had for years. And from people who were saying it wouldn't succeed, it's about halfway through the run when everyone realized how big this thing was actually going to be. Everyone started to pitch maxi series. Every company wanted one of these giant crossovers. Everyone was trying to catch lightning in a bottle again, and they couldn't. They can't, because the Crisis thing was created to solve a problem. It was not just...
What was the problem it was trying to solve?
That DC, today, if you look at the sales of DC and Marvel, they're pretty much equal. 1 month DC's number one, 1 month Marvel's number one, but they sell about the same number of copies per month. In 1982, because the thing started long before it ever came out, that wasn't the case with DC and Marvel. The biggest, Marvel was outselling DC multiple times. And the problem was we had to convince the people who were Marvel fans. They called themselves Marvel zombies. That was what they gave themselves. They loved Marvel, and hey, I love Marvel too. I was editor-in-chief at Marvel, but now I was over at DC, so my job was there. But the whole thing was we had to convince the Marvel people to give DC a try, because they had long stopped doing it, which meant we had to show them how many good characters there were. We had to do some big things to catch their attention. You have to slap the guy with a fish in the face to grab their attention first. And Crisis was that fish in the face. It had to be enormous. It had to be giant. It had to be able to bring people over to say, oh, I didn't know DC was that interesting. Now let me check a couple of other titles. And that allowed us immediately afterwards. Dark Knight and Watchmen came directly after Crisis. And then all the companies now have giant all the time. So that's a very specific thing. It changed the entire face of comics and allowed for you to rebuild an industry, because the industry was in chaos back then. Somebody needs to...
But relative to today, it's almost like you created the streaming show. I mean, the modern streaming show where it's all continuity, where everybody dies, where people die, there are shocking results, and where there's stakes. Because remember, almost all TV in those days, you didn't watch, maybe in Miami Vice, maybe villains would get killed, but Crockett and Tubbs didn't get killed in Miami Vice. That just didn't happen. Yeah. And everything was pretty much a reset. It was very episodic. And I think a lot of what comic books brought to this is there was, we started building a lot of continuity. And wasn't that true, Doug? Basically by the time you get to second season of Joe or Transformers, there's a lot of stuff that looks a lot like continuity.
Well, or in Conan the Adventurer, the series which Christie edited, it was 65 episodes, but there was it wasn't a complete serial, but there was the first third, which started in a certain milieu, and then the middle section, and then the final section, which led up to the final climax, whatever it was. I mean, I'm sorry, I can't remember it, but yeah. So there was a complete series arc to it, and there was development and story and character.
And that extended over to TV. You look at shows like The Big Bang Theory or several others, they have a continuity that you never saw in comedy shows before. Those characters' lives did not get changed for the joke.
Right.
They always continue through, and when they refer to them 3 years later, 4 years later, the scene will be exactly what they referred to back then. They didn't have to make up a new joke. They built the characters and they followed through on the characters, and that came right out of comics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No,
would
definitely
say
did.
Well,
Sorry,
I'd
Luke,
say
go on. Wait.
Oh, no problem. I'd say that role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons also spearheaded some changes as well, because you have your characters that change in advance and you influence your surroundings. And I would say that your electronic gaming clearly is, I think there's clearly that it was a huge influence, and that you saw your games change, and they tried to you had characters with similar stats that we realized in Dungeons and Dragons, with your hit points and levels and archetypal classes and things like that in your fantasy game. So people were trying to recreate that experience in an electronic format. So I think along with the comic books developing, also for gaming, you could now, instead of just dressing up like Doctor Who at a convention, you can play the Doctor Who role-playing game or whatever the case may be.
You could come be Conan and go fun. No, exactly. Well, but I think it goes deeper than that. Is what gaming brought to it is it had to make sense. In other words, because when you're playing a game, a game is really a piece of math, right? That you put personality and character and soul on top of, but you're rolling dice, right? And you have probabilities, you have charts. And after that, your characters couldn't have arbitrary powers that didn't make any sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But let me bring up one other point. So we have Wizards of the Coast taking over AD&D, and they did version 3 and they did version 4, and those weren't selling well at all. But then, and Luke can talk about this much more than I can, actors started playing the game. And that made such a gigantic expansion in people interested in playing, because we have this guy with the most beautiful wife in the world who plays in his basement, and you guys can watch him do it. So Luke, talk a little bit more about the actors.
Oh, who are you talking about?
I think he's talking about Critical Role and Matt Mercer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and so Matt Mercer, he's a nerd's nerd. He's a voice actor and does voice acting for anime shows as well as various video games, right? And so, but man, he is a talented dungeon master because he paints the picture for you, right? And he really paints this beautiful scenery and then flows with it. But all of his players are his buddies, who are voice actors. So imagine how they're immersing themselves into character anyway, right? So they take on these characters, and it now becomes fun to watch. So I think, if you are someone who's not a gamer and you pull the rule book off the shelf, it looks daunting. Oh my God, it's 300 pages long. I don't know how I'm going to play this game. I can't do it. But if you watch somebody play it, you realize, oh, those are just a bunch of references and suggestions. There's really just a few core things that you need to know. And if you don't know, make it up, right? It's about having fun and playing the game with your friends.
So now, Luke, there's that actor, though, who also plays the game. I know you were in his basement.
Sure. Oh, yeah, Joe Manganiello.
Manganiello, he's made the game famous.
Yes, he's a huge bastard.
1 second. Joe was also the guy who played Deathstroke, my character.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Yes.
Well, all right, but that's my entire point. The entire thing I've been driving at is it's come this whole circle and evolved on top of this. That that basically this was all stuff that kids and geeks were doing in the 80s. And a surprising number of things, a surprising number of normal people were actually watching our shows. Because cartoon shows were any kid. What?
I want to tie in the DC and Marvel thing here, just because Joe's first big role was Flash Thompson in Spider-Man.
Oh,
so he was
Spider-Man
and Deathstroke, so he did both sides of that. And
we went out to lunch just as he got the role for Deathstroke, and he wanted to just talk about it. And I thought that was really cool because generally most people forget the comic book guys who created the characters and go off and do it. He would, of course, have to do what the director wanted, but he wanted a good grounding in who I saw the character as, and I thought it was great.
Sure.
He does that kind of research on like everything. He loves gaming and fantasy, and of course he's a big dude, and
Yeah,
he has a muscle build.
Big buster, atypical 80s stereotype of what a gamer looks like, right? So that has evolved greatly as it's become more mainstream. A lot more women play.
A lot more women, yes, that's a big deal.
And same, I think, in comic books as well. There's been it's broadened its audience, and maybe it's all cross pollination, and these multiple ways to explore your interest has really helped each one of these areas grow and flourish.
Well, Vin Diesel's a big player too, right?
Oh well, all right. I'll tell. First time I met Vin Diesel, I'll tell this story. It happened. It's not in the book because it was so much long after. A friend of mine, John Platten, and I, who have done a lot of stuff with, did the game called Riddick: Escape from Butcher. Chronicles of Riddick. It's Escape from Butcher Bay, right? The first night of voice recording, John had to go to some bachelor party in Las Vegas. So I'm meeting Vin in a studio in Studio City. It's kind of, near that Killer Shrimp place, is my recollection of it. It's, it's a voice studio. And I'm sitting there, I'm going to meet Vin Diesel. It's like, I fully expected Fast and Furious to show up. I never met Vin. I didn't know what he's like. I didn't know anything about him. I fully expected to see cars doing fishtails in the driveway and, and all that. Instead, in walks Vin. And, this very attractive woman, right? I'm thinking, well, big surprise. He's super star.
Yeah, really.
It's his sister who runs this company, Samantha. You would have thought he was the bouncer and she was the star, right? Okay. And I'm sitting there talking to Vin, and probably 10 minutes in, and I have it's in that moment when the tech guys are all moving the microphones around, and, you're doing all that stuff. And, he'd read the script and he liked it. And we spent probably half an hour going over things in it, and he was just doing lines, from the script. But then we had 10 minutes of time to kill. Somehow, inside about minute 2, he was telling me about his character Melcorp, who's a half elf, level 60 drow.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm pretending I know what he's talking about. I didn't remember. I knew a drow was some kind of dark elf. Mm-hmm. Okay. But I mean, that was my sense of it. It makes a lot of sense if you know Vin, what the character is. But I emailed Gary Monday, and I said, "Hey Gary, so what's a drow anyway?" Right? I was too lazy to look it up. Gary writes me back and he explains what drow is, and he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, Vin Diesel has his half elf drow," and it was like all of a sudden. Then later, I mean, Vin is like the real deal as a gamer. I remember after another recording session, we're sitting out in the back of his car, which had a satellite dish on it, so he could play World of Warcraft in the car. And he was showing me how to play World of Warcraft because, I was having, I just knew that if I installed World of Warcraft, this is before I was working at Blizzard or anything like that it was pure heroin and it would go bad, but Vin's showing me how to play it. But I'm sitting there thinking, okay, we have a different set of options for what we would be doing at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. Vin Diesel can be at any club in the world on a Friday night. I'm driving home. Okay. And he's sitting there showing me because he's trying to install it into these patches. I didn't finally start playing until Zane was playing. He's a hardcore Warcraft player. And he read me the patch that was dedicated to Gary.
Oh, wow.
And I just decided, it's like, all right, I'll put the needle in one last time, and then I installed Warcraft. But it was, they did a whole patch, dedicated to Gary. Cause I mean, we all know Warcraft couldn't exist without it. And the other comic book crossover with Vin Diesel. Vin later on pulled out this map he did in high school and he like still had his wargaming buddies come over. But I mean, this was epic. This was like, probably a 5 foot by 5 foot map where he'd done his own world.
Wow.
I mean, this is hardcore. Then later on one night we were working on a movie about Hannibal, and he pulled out 300, right? And he said, "Have you ever seen this graphic novel?" And I said, "You're kidding, right?" Because I worked with Frank on that, and Frank just happened to be staying in town at that point. We were supposed to be get together until Ben called and wanted to work on the script. So I said, "Well, Frank's here if you want to get him up here." He said, "You know Frank Miller?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, no Frank." So but getting Frank and Vin together was hard because you have Vin who can't go to like the W on a Friday night. I mean, it wouldn't. He's just looking at me. I can't go there Friday night. And Frank, who you normally wouldn't trust him to find his way around the block, in LA, it's just that Frank's just not your get in the car and bomb up to some obscure canyon, and he's not that guy. So finally, they sent the Vin Mobile down to pick up Frank, drove Frank up to Vin's house, and Vin wanted to sketch with him. And Frank was great. He's drawing Hannibal stuff. And Vin's got his sketching tools out and all that. And I'm saying, hey, kind of like jamming with Eric Clapton, isn't it? Vin looks at me and says, yeah.
Wow. That's a great story.
He was the synthesis of all that. Well, he tells that story that if you Google Flint, Dille, Gary Gygax, Vin Diesel, and Frank Miller, you will find his version of the story. But he was the synthesis of all of this stuff. The guy's hyper intelligent. He's a hardcore D&D, guy who's totally, caught into, comic book culture and everything else. And if you squint and look at Chronicles of Riddick, it's his way of trying to do a D&D movie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because
I
we just did the game.
Yeah, I can see that.
But because that's what it is. It's the Furians. I mean, just look at it. It's and that's what that planted. But what I'm feeling is the stuff that was all converging for the first time back in the 80s, and the world we were living in is what became 2020 high end culture. It is 2020 culture. I mean, literally, half the shows on TV are comic book shows that are literally the characters Marv created. Those that Stan Lee didn't create or Jack Kirby didn't create. And it's like all this all paid off when the technology, but more importantly, the actors caught up, because there are so many of them are people of this world. Does that make any sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because it's all been hard coded, and that ultimately, is the real legacy. Gary and Marv and Doug and you guys and Jim and Luke. Luke's the first person that was ever born into this world and has never not known this world. That's the other thing that's really kind of fascinating about it.
Yeah, he's genetically disposed toward this world.
Yeah. Well, and also environmentally, conditioned. I mean, he was probably throwing dice into the boxes when they shipped the first sets.
Probably.
I mean, Heidi's told me stories.
For sure.
And I love
exactly.
Luke is kind of the torchbearer for role playing in general. I really like what he does with Gary Con, and he's kind of the example of what the best of us are.
Yeah, I know. That's the whole thing. I mean, that's what I'm saying. This all grew up in the bad, for all the bad stuff going on. All that stuff grew up right. You know what I mean? And you have this preposterous character who shows up in battle fatigues, and then now he's his Iron Maiden shirt, and they both
I figured they could make an official appearance in uniform. So
yeah, really, good job.
Is that legal? Good.
Okay.
I'm about to jump back to work.
Does the Army? Are you really going back tonight?
Yeah, this is my office. I just threw up the Wi-Fi and joined you guys.
Oh wow!
You're sitting in a military
installation.
Wonderful.
Well,
Rank has its privileges.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I know. What's the funny thing to think is he's like a real high-ranking military officer. That's the other interesting thing about it. Yeah. I mean, he'll always be the bogus league football game guy to me, but I mean, he is in fact the real deal. No, this is cool. Well, guys, we're hitting near the end of the time I promised, and I really thank you all for coming. This is a really interesting one. I mean, it's this because this embody. I mean, really, the four of you embody all these worlds crashing together.
We do have a couple of quick questions from the YouTube chat if you guys would like to.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. I'm not like refusing to answer questions. I just know everybody's getting tired. Okay, what?
Yeah. No problem there. And let's see. There's just a couple of them. Nothing too deep. Agent Axiom's first question is: was there anything on G.I. Joe or Transformers that you wanted to do that the powers that be wouldn't let you do? And was there ever any talk of a crossover episode at any point?
Well, Doug, you want to field that one?
Well, I'm just thinking about crossovers. I don't think that was ever taken seriously. I'm sure we kind of talked about it, but nobody ever considered that for real because they were just distinct properties and they had their own tracks. I'm sure there were lots of things that Buzz wanted to do with G.I. Joe that people just threw up their hands in horror and said no. Yeah. But in the actual Joe series, we did stuff. I mean, hitting with real fists, but they were essentially little movies that were the equivalent of what was playing on the big screen. They seemed like PG-13 movies to me, action adventure movies with a neat little sci-fi twist to them. So we pretty much got to do whatever we wanted to do.
I never felt the slightest bit constrained. What I will say about crossovers, I have two things to say about crossovers. One, that was never. There was a line between Transformers and G.I. Joe we couldn't cross. We snuck stuff in there when we could. Right. Hector Ramirez. There were all sorts of background characters. We snuck in there. A lot of people noticed that a guy, I think it was Saberjet in Humanoids, was the same character who was Ace. And the presumption he'd have a horrible plane crash and was rebuilt, and his uniform that kept him alive, his body armor that kept him alive, was his plane. Nice. Okay, that was, but in Humanoids, nobody's paying attention, as Buzz pointed out last week. So we had that, and then, of course, there's Marissa Fairborn, who is, quite obviously supposed to be Flint and Lady J's daughter.
Right.
Okay. So we would sneak stuff in there, but the best crossover experience I had, and I suggested it to Hasbro, guys I was talking to at Hasbro, and they look at me like I'm on drugs, but it was still one of the best times I remember having. And that was one day I took a box. I've told the story before, but I took a box of Hasbro sent us. They didn't send us like everything in the line or anything like that, but periodically we'd get a box. And I took a box of G.I. Joes and Transformers up to the DDC mansion. And Gary and I were sitting there in the front lawn, and we had, Matthew and Christina were there with, Pim's cups, and, a couple, the Ukeriches were there with tape measures, and maybe Jim Johnson was even still there. I don't remember Luke or Ernie being there, but that doesn't mean they weren't. I just don't remember them from that scene. And Gary and I were trying to figure out miniatures rules for full-size Joes and Transformers.
Oh, neat.
Right, being played in this yard. And it's like, how powerful is Megatron's gun? And, can a Sky Striker not knock out a Decepticon and stuff like, because of the Joes and Autobots against the Decepticons and Cobra. And it was really fun. I mean, we were having a great time playing this, G.I. Joe scale outdoors miniatures game. And we were just using chainmail. I mean, it wasn't like we were doing anything elaborate and we were just making stuff up. But I don't understand why nobody does that. Let's do that. We can't ever do it at GaryCon because it's always in the middle of February and nobody's going to want to go outside in Wisconsin, Geneva in February and do it. Do the ice version, snowcat version. But someday I would like to do that with a bunch of gamers. Is just take the figures, because remember the Joe figures are standard size. Just the Transformers you can fudge it, and some of them are they never get to that scale, but just fudge it. And right. I think you'd have a lot of fun with it, and you could pretend Joe vehicles transform too. Would be the other thing to do.
Mm-hmm. All right. The second question we've got from Marv here is from Rodimus Primal. It pertains to Dark Awakening, and he wanted to know if you had to do any kind of a checking with that to make sure that it fit in with the rest of the continuity.
I have to tell you, and I'm sorry, I don't even remember what show Dark Awakening was in.
Dark Awakening was a nefarious Transformers episode, and I'm guessing you wrote it, right?
I don't remember. I wrote a couple of Transformers, but the problem is, I just don't. It's a long time ago, and I could tell you a little bit about the Return of Optimus Prime, but not even the whole story there.
Well, the reason I remember it is it was near the very end of when I was story editing. You were probably on, and it's kind of like when we were in triage mode, and I was like still a little bit on Transformers. And it was one of those episodes we did where, and a matter of fact, Tony Zaleski wrote it. Okay, he was the actual writer on it.
Oh,
but I remember, coming up with the plot, because we came up with most of the plots, at the very beginning of the season, and it was sort of while we were in our probably darkest mode Transformers ever got into. You are probably also starting on the Return of Optimus Prime, because we had to clean that up, but it takes place in a mausoleum. It's an episode I always mentally confuse with the equally morbid Starscream's Ghost that comes out right after it. And I don't remember. No, I mean, at that point, I think, we were just generally in the doghouse, but that didn't mean there was a lot more adult supervision. It was we want to fix because that's the episode where I'm sorry, I missed I buried the lead. It's the episode where Optimus Prime comes back as a zombie and then gets killed again at the end of the episode.
Really?
Okay, so the two whiplashes are happening. Yeah, it was, and like the zombie part of it was very, Steve Gerber idea. He thought it really funny to have him come back as a zombie. I'm sitting there with Inhumanoid sitting in my head. So zombie, I'm in. Yeah, zombie robot. Let's do a zombie robot. I would try to figure out how to put him in that show. And Tony Zaleski got the assignment of doing it. And it was, I do not know whether this is true. And I'm not reading the Transformer Wiki article in depth enough to know whether they know it or whether it is true. But my belief is it was not shown in the original run in order, because you're killing Optimus Prime again, and everything. And Marv's in the process of being hired to like bring Optimus Prime back and clean up that mess we made in the movie. And so it was extremely controversial and nefarious. It takes place in a mausoleum. I mean, and you got quintessence. I mean, you probably, if you had to pick a moment when Transformers went as dark as it went, which sort of matched our mood at that point because we knew it was over. That was Dark Awakening. Yeah, it's a fascinating script for somebody to ask a question about, because it's both a really interesting moment in the franchise, and it was an interesting moment in our life.
All right, and the last question seems to be probably general for anyone around the D&D mansion. Did you have to give 10 gold to a wizard for entrance to the secret room?
I got in for free.
Yes, you just had to know the command word to be able to open up the secret door, and then you could get in there.
There we go.
Yeah, someday we ought to play. We ought to do just our own little role-playing scenario of role-playing being in the D&D mansion, but like with all the sinister stuff people thought was in there. I mean, that could be that would be a really fun little dungeon quest.
Oh, that could be a lot of fun, because you got.
We could make the agents bad guys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, you have all these Hollywood people there who are mysteriously disappearing. It's kind of cross between D&D and Agatha Christie or Knives Out or something.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to make that scenario.
We got to work.
I think I could still. I could still diagram the mansion well enough to do it in the grounds.
Yeah.
All right. That's great. Thank you. Whoever asked that question, we'll get to work on it.
All right, guys. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad I was able to join everyone.
Oh,
yeah. Glad to see you, Luke.
Good to see you.
Thanks so much. And thanks for coming and giving an hour and a half of your life here. And you guys are great. This is so far my favorite episode. So here we are.
All right.
All right, good.
Talk to you guys.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks for tuning in today. Be sure to pre-order your autographed copy of the Gamesmaster, almost famous in the Geek 80s. From the link in the stream description. If you enjoy the show, be sure to give us a like and subscribe to the channel.
Luke. It's okay, Flint.
If you have an idea for what you'd like to see on a future show, leave us a comment and we'll take a look.